Welcome to PodWeCast. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more great content. And if you enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to a town that is supposedly haunted by the ghost of a serial killer.
Ooh.
I know you guys love the paranormal and true crime, so this one's going to be right up your alley.
Sounds spooky.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. So we're going deep into this small town, nestled in the woods, dense woods, and it's got a long and dark history. Our source material is this true crime podcast called PodWeCast, and their episode is called This Town is Haunted by a Serial Killer.
Catchy.
Yeah, they really went all out with the title. But they investigate this chilling legend of Samuel Cain.
Samuel Cain.
Yeah, they call him the Butcher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they dig up some really spooky details about Cain's curse before his execution.
Ooh, a curse.
Yeah, and reports of ghostly apparitions and like a whole string of unexplained disappearances.
I see. So this has been going on for a while.
Yeah, for decades.
Wow. What I find fascinating about this is how, the brutality of his crimes has, become so intertwined with the town's identity. It's almost as if the fear itself has, taken on a life of its own.
Right, and that brings us to the curse.
Yeah.
Before his execution, he shouts, "I'll be back, and when I do, I'll take you all with me."
Chilling last words.
I know, right? Like straight out of a horror movie. The podcast hosts say that locals are terrified to even speak his name in the woods.
Really?
Yeah, they think it'll summon his wrath.
That's intense.
What do you make of this, blend of real-life horror and supernatural?
It's kind of a classic example of how, trauma can just imprint itself on a community. And in this case, his horrific acts have created, fertile ground for all these supernatural beliefs to take root.
So you're saying the curse, whether it's real or not, it's become a way for the townspeople to explain the unexplainable.
Yeah, basically make sense of the chaos and the fear.
Okay, let's unpack that a little. The podcast hosts, they focused their investigation on the woods surrounding the town, which was Cain's preferred hunting ground. And people report all these eerie occurrences out there.
Like what?
Shadowy figures, footsteps, the feeling of being watched.
Creepy.
You might find this particularly chilling. One hunter actually claims to have come face to face with Cain's ghost.
Whoa!
I know. So what's going on in those woods? Is it our minds playing tricks on us, or is there something more at play?
Well, the human brain is wired to look for patterns, even when there are none. And in a place like that, steeped in so much violence, it's not surprising that people would interpret any sights or sounds as his ghost.
So the woods themselves have become a canvas for their fears.
Yeah, it's like the fear is contagious. It spreads from person to person.
And tragically, that fear is fueled by these very real disappearances that continue to plague the town.
You're talking about people going missing.
Tourists and locals vanishing without a trace, just fueling the belief that Cain's spirit is still claiming victims. The case of Lily, a teenager, who disappeared near the woods, is especially heartbreaking.
Yeah, what makes her case so unsettling is the combination of the tangible and the intangible. Not only did she disappear near the woods, but her family reported hearing all these noises afterward.
Like what kind of voices?
Whispers, creaking floorboards, even her voice calling for help.
So it's like this blend of real and imagined, making it almost impossible to know what's real and what's not.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And then there's Jake Harrison, a newcomer to the town, totally dismissed all the warnings about the curse.
No.
Yeah. And of course he vanishes into the woods one night.
Never to be seen again.
Never to be seen again.
I feel like he tempted fate.
It's like he was asking for it.
His case is interesting because it really highlights the power of belief. Whether Cain's ghost is actually responsible, it's almost beside the point. What matters is that the townspeople believe it to be true.
So it's not just about the ghosts themselves, but the stories that we tell ourselves about them.
Exactly. Stories have a way of becoming self-fulfilling prophecies.
Okay, so you're saying if you believe a place is haunted, you're more likely to interpret anything as evidence of the supernatural.
Yeah, and the more people believe, the more the story takes on a life of its own.
And that brings us to the town itself, which seems to be just as haunted as the woods.
In what way?
People see apparitions on the streets, lights flickering, doors slamming, footsteps in empty buildings.
It's like they're trapped in a horror movie.
I know, it's crazy.
But these mundane occurrences are actually quite clever. They create this atmosphere of unease. The ordinary rules don't apply.
It's like a constant low-grade anxiety. keeping everyone on edge.
Exactly.
And then there's Oak Street House, which was supposedly Kane's hideout.
Okay.
Now it's a hotspot for paranormal activity lights, whispers, this sense of overwhelming dread.
What is it about that house that makes it so much creepier?
I don't know. It's like, think of it this way. Places can absorb the energy of the events that happen there. And Oak Street House, as his supposed hideout, becomes a focal point for all the fear and anxiety.
It's a tangible reminder of his evil.
It's like the walls themselves are whispering his secrets. And speaking of whispers, the podcast hosts uncover this phenomenon they call the Whispers of Kane.
What's that?
Residents report hearing these eerie whispers around town, sometimes just a single word like run.
Oh, wow.
Or other times full phrases. It's as if Kane himself is trying to communicate.
Do you think a spirit can do that?
I mean, it's a creepy thought, but what do you think?
While the idea of a ghost whispering is intriguing, you got to remember our brains are good at filling in the blanks. So in a town where everyone is already on edge, primed to hear his voice, it's not surprising that they'd hear anything as his whispers.
So the town is haunted by its own fear.
In a way, yeah.
And it seems like the town has embraced this cycle.
What do you mean?
Well, they have this annual event called the Ghost Vigil, where people gather to honor Kane's victims and potentially interact with the paranormal.
So they're kind of leaning into it.
It's like a collective exorcism, an attempt to banish the demons that haunt them. And speaking of things that go bump in the night, let's talk about the screams from the lake.
Okay.
Apparently on quiet nights, you can hear these ghostly screams echoing across the water.
Really?
Locals believe they're the cries of Kane's victims, trapped beneath the surface.
Water always has that connection to the supernatural, like in folklore and mythology.
Right. It represents the unknown.
Exactly. The depths, the mysteries.
And in this context, the screams become like a chilling reminder of the victims whose stories remain untold.
Right.
One fisherman even reported hearing these cries for help. That got louder as he approached the center of the lake, but when he reached the spot, the screams abruptly stopped.
Wow, it's like whatever was out there didn't want to be found.
Yeah.
Have you ever encountered anything like that, where the paranormal seemed to deliberately evade detection?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
And then there are the stolen portraits, which I have to admit kind of creep me out.
Oh, tell me more.
Photos and old portraits have a habit of disappearing from people's homes, only to reappear at the haunted sites around town.
What, like the woods and stuff?
Yeah.
What's unsettling about that is like that sense of personal violation. It's like Cain, or whatever force is at work, is targeting specific people, invading their homes, and taking something precious.
It's almost as if Kane's spirit is like collecting these images as a way of marking his territory.
Saying, I was here.
Yeah, and I'm not gone.
Do you think there's a psychological basis for that? This idea of a ghost wanting to leave a mark?
It's an interesting question. In psychology, there's this thing called a legacy drive, which is the human desire to leave something behind, to make a mark on the world that outlasts us.
So you're saying maybe this persists after death?
Yeah, like driving spirits to seek recognition, or even exert control over the world they've left behind.
Chilling thought.
Okay, so next up, we have the midnight footsteps.
What are those?
Residents report hearing these heavy, slow footsteps echoing through the streets at midnight.
At midnight?
Yeah, always at midnight. And they stop at locations significant to Kane's crimes before fading away.
So it's like he's retracing his steps?
Yeah, it's a classic example of how our brains can create patterns and narratives even where none exist. The footsteps themselves might be nothing more than the creaking of an old house, or the wind, or even an animal.
But in a town like this, where everyone is already hyper-aware, those sounds are easily interpreted as his ghostly footsteps.
But why footsteps? Of all the sounds he could make, why are people fixated on the sound of him walking?
Footsteps are unsettling because they suggest deliberate movement, like a conscious entity approaching, observing, maybe even hunting.
It's like he's still asserting his dominance, even in death.
Yeah, and speaking of rituals, there's this one the locals do called the missing candlelight.
Oh yeah, on certain nights, they leave candles burning outside their homes to honor those who've disappeared and to ward off Kane's spirit.
Do you think these rituals offer any genuine comfort?
It's a tough question. On the one hand,
Yeah.
it gives them a sense of control for a situation that feels very much out of control. But on the other hand, they're acknowledging the very thing they're trying to ward off.
It's keeping the fear alive.
Exactly. And you know what? Despite all this, the town actually embraces its haunted history in a pretty unique way.
How so?
They have these annual ghost tours that take visitors to all the creepiest spots, like the woods, the lake, even Oak Street House.
Why do you think people are so drawn to these dark tourism experiences?
I think there's a certain fascination with the macabre, this desire to confront our fears, but in a safe environment.
Like staring into the abyss, but from a distance.
Exactly. Okay, brace yourself for this next one. There's a local legend about something called the Watcher's Journal.
Okay.
Apparently, someone in town kept a detailed record of all the strange occurrences tied to Samuel Cain. It's said to contain like firsthand accounts of encounters with his ghost and even chilling predictions about future hauntings.
That's creepy.
So does this journal exist? And if so, what secrets does it hold?
It's like the holy grail for ghost hunters, as a source of endless speculation.
Yeah. Speaking of things that keep popping up, let's talk about the curse stones.
The curse stones.
Yeah, these are small, unmarked stones scattered throughout the woods. And each one is believed to mark the spot where Cain's spirit claimed a victim.
Oh, wow.
Locals are terrified to move them. They think they'll anger his spirit.
It's like they're little monuments to the town's tragic past.
Yeah, a constant reminder that the darkness is lurking nearby.
And as if the woods weren't creepy enough, there's also this old church bell that rings at night.
I heard about this, even though the church has been abandoned for decades.
So spooky.
Locals say it's a warning that Cain's spirit has claimed another soul.
Like he's ringing the town's death knell.
Exactly. And if the bells weren't enough, there are also strange symbols appearing around town.
Really?
Yeah, scratched into trees, rocks, even buildings.
What kind of symbols?
They resemble the marks Cain was known to carve near his hiding places.
It's like he's tagging his territory.
It's hard to know if these symbols are a form of communication from beyond the grave or just copycat vandalism.
But either way, it's unsettling.
Yeah, it's a reminder that his presence, whether real or imagined, continues to linger.
Okay, so speaking of uncertainty, let's talk about this phenomenon that occurs at sunset. It's called the Cain shadows.
Oh, yeah. Locals say they see shadowy figures walking around at sunset, always appearing in the exact places where Cain committed his crimes. Some believe they're echoes of his victims. Others think they're manifestations of his curse.
It's a clever play on light and shadow, using a natural occurrence to create a supernatural effect.
Yeah, it's like even in the fading light, darkness can still lurk.
And shadows can take on a life of their own.
And these shadows, whether they're real or imagined, tap into our deepest fears.
Of the unknown.
Yeah, the things that lurk in the darkness.
They're a reminder that the past is never truly past.
Okay, so remember Thomas Reeves, the skeptical night watchman?
Yeah, the one who didn't believe in ghosts.
Yeah, he scoffed at all the stories about Cain's ghost until the night he vanished.
Oh, no.
He was patrolling the town's abandoned buildings, and witnesses saw him enter this old factory, but he never came out.
What happened?
They only found his flashlight on the ground, still on.
That's so creepy.
It's like he stepped into thin air. Locals believe Cain's spirit took him for his lack of respect. Like he demands belief, or at least fear.
It's a common motif. This idea that the supernatural demands respect, that disbelief is a form of provocation.
It makes you wonder about the nature of belief itself. Is it just accepting something is true? Or is there something more to it, like an energetic exchange that can influence the world around us?
I think it's more than just believing.
Right. And speaking of places that feed off fear, let's talk about the abandoned hospital on the edge of town.
Okay.
It's been closed for decades, but it's where they took many of Cain's victims. And some people believe their spirits never left.
Do you think hospitals are more prone to hauntings?
Yeah, I think they are because of all the intense emotions.
The life and death, hope and despair.
Yeah, exactly.
And this one has such a dark history.
I know. People who go inside report hearing ghostly voices.
Yeah.
Calling for help. The sounds of medical equipment that doesn't exist anymore.
That's crazy.
And even a figure roaming the halls, believed to be the spirit of a doctor.
Yeah.
Who tried to save Cain's victims.
That's interesting. It suggests that hauntings aren't always about malevolent spirits.
Right.
Sometimes it's about unfinished business. Souls who are trapped, seeking closure.
Maybe even trying to help others.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that repeat themselves, there's the story about the town clock, which locals called the death clock.
Okay.
It stopped at exactly 3:15 a.m. the night Cain died. And ever since, it restarts on the anniversary of each disappearance.
What?
Yeah. Ticking for exactly 1 minute at 3:15 a.m. before going silent again.
Wow.
It's like the clock itself is a witness to the town's ongoing tragedy, keeping time with the rhythm of death.
Okay. And then there's Martha Bell,
The school teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
Her disappearance is so tragic, it suggests that even those who try to understand the haunting are not immune to its dangers.
She was researching Samuel Kane's story for a history project, visiting all the haunted sites, interviewing locals. The day she disappeared, she told her sister that she had found something big.
But no one knows what it was.
Her last known location was near the woods, where they found her car abandoned. But her notes and research were never found.
It's like she vanished into thin air.
I know, and took her secrets with her.
Her disappearance is different from the others. It's like she stumbled onto something that put her in danger, that her research uncovered a truth that was better left buried.
Her story is like a warning to anyone who digs too deep. It's like Kane's ghost is guarding his secrets, and anyone who gets too close risks meeting the same fate.
Okay, and speaking of spooky things happening in the town, there are these reports of a ghostly horse-drawn carriage.
Oh yeah, they call it the Midnight Carriage, and it's believed to be an omen of death tied to Kane's legacy.
The image of a ghostly carriage is so classic, it really evokes the past.
Yeah, like a bygone era when death was more visible.
Exactly.
It's said to appear on the anniversary of a murder, silently gliding down Main Street before vanishing near the woods. Those who see it claim to hear whispers and faint cries for help.
It's like their souls are still trapped.
Locals believe the carriage represents a funeral procession for those Kane claimed.
A haunting reminder.
Yeah. Then there's Willow Park, once a popular spot for families, now deserted after dark because of the missing footsteps.
The missing footsteps.
Yeah. People hear these footsteps on the gravel paths late at night, but when they turn around, no one's there.
So creepy.
They even see impressions in the gravel, as if invisible feet were walking beside them.
That plays on our primal fear of the unseen, the lurking presence.
Yeah. They think the footsteps follow anyone who enters after dark.
Like Kane's ghost.
Yeah. Always a few steps behind.
Waiting to claim another soul.
Yeah.
The idea of being followed by something you can't see is pure horror.
The townspeople are too afraid to walk through the park at night. It's abandoned.
Okay, speaking of shadows, the town's old courthouse is famous for its mirrored hallways.
Kane was tried in that courthouse. And ever since then, people report seeing this ghostly figure resembling him, lurking in the mirrors.
Oh, wow.
He only appears in the reflections, never in the actual room.
Mirrors have always had that mystical quality, like portals to other worlds.
Yeah. And in a haunting, they become even more unsettling.
It's like blurring the lines between reality and the supernatural.
One cleaner quit her job because she kept seeing Kane's reflection.
Every time she passed the mirror.
Yeah, she was so freaked out.
That highlights the psychological impact of these hauntings, even if you try to rationalize them. Your brain still reacts with fear.
It's like Kane's spirit is trapped, unable to escape the scene of his trial.
And if the haunted courthouse isn't enough, there's also the phenomenon of disappearing children's toys.
Oh yeah, the toys. Dolls, trucks, all kinds of toys.
Yeah.
Vanish from homes and reappear at the haunted sites around town.
Like the woods in Oak Street.
Yeah, even the lake.
That's disturbing. It targets something so innocent. The idea that his spirit or some other force is taking children's toys.
Some parents think he's luring children to their doom. Others think it's the spirits of his victims trying to communicate. And the toys are often in pristine condition.
As if carefully placed?
I know, it just adds to the creepiness.
It suggests a deliberate act, a conscious effort to communicate or even intimidate.
It's like a twisted Easter egg hunt.
Yeah.
And just when you thought it couldn't get any creepier, residents report seeing this shadowy figure on Main Street every night.
Really?
Yeah, always in the same spot at the same time. They call it the shadow figure, and it's believed to be Kane's spirit.
It's a classic representation of the unknown, the lurking danger.
Witnesses describe it as a dark silhouette with no visible features.
Just a menacing shape.
Yeah, watching anyone passing by.
The lack of detail is what makes it scary. Our imaginations fill in the blanks.
They say if you see it, you'll experience bad luck or disturbing nightmares.
It's not just a passive observer, it can influence your life.
Like a warning, the figure has been reported by dozens of people, and despite all attempts to explain it away, no one knows its true origin. Many believe it's a manifestation of his curse, a reminder that he still haunts the town.
So we've explored the woods, the apparitions, the rituals, the symbols. But the creepiest part might be the town cemetery.
Yeah, cemeteries are just naturally creepy. But this one has a set of unmarked graves scattered around the edges, and they're believed to be tied to Kane's victims.
Whoa.
Some believe they were meant to hide the evidence of his crimes. Others think they hold the remains of those who disappeared after his death.
Claimed by his vengeful spirit.
Yeah.
The unmarked graves add another layer of tragedy. They represent the victims whose stories are lost.
Visitors report feeling cold spots near the graves and hearing faint whispers.
It's like their souls are trying to communicate.
Yeah. Or maybe even to warn the living.
It creates a sense of unease, the feeling that something is watching, maybe even reaching out.
The unmarked graves are a chilling reminder that some mysteries may never be solved. All we have are the whispers and the legends and the lingering fear.
And just when you thought you'd heard it all, there's one final superstition.
Oh, what is it?
It's called the last breath.
Okay, I'm listening.
Locals believe that if you hear someone call your name at night, you must never answer, because it could be Cain's spirit.
Trying to steal your last breath.
Exactly.
So answering the call invites his ghost into your home, putting you and your loved ones at risk.
Yeah.
Wow, this superstition has become so ingrained that people refuse to answer any strange sounds after dark.
It makes sense.
I know we've covered so much ground,
Yeah.
but I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
You're absolutely right. There are layers upon layers to this story.
This deep dive has been a whirlwind of eerie events,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just getting started.
Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore even more unsettling occurrences and delve deeper into this haunted history. Welcome back to our deep dive into the town haunted by Samuel Cain.
Yeah, we're back.
We uncovered some truly chilling stories in part 1, haven't we?
Chilling is an understatement. I'm already sleeping with the lights on after hearing all that.
It seems like every corner of this town holds some creepy tale or another.
Yeah, we were talking about the cemetery and those unmarked graves
Yeah?
at the end of part 1.
Yes.
But there's more to that story, right?
There's this oppressive atmosphere that people report when they visit, like a weight pressing down on them.
I can imagine it must be the sorrow of all those lost souls just hanging in the air. The podcast mentioned ghostly figures wandering among the tombstones, some even appearing to mourn at specific graves. You think they're trapped there?
It's a common belief
Okay.
that spirits can become attached to locations, especially those with strong emotional resonance. And the cemetery, as a place of death and mourning, might hold a particular attraction for those spirits who are unable to move on.
So they're drawn there by unfinished business, unresolved emotions, or even fear of what lies beyond.
It's possible.
That makes sense. So they're not necessarily malevolent, just lost. It's heartbreaking to think they're stuck there, unable to find peace.
And this idea of restless spirits is echoed in another feature of the cemetery, the Whispering Wall.
The Whispering Wall. That sounds ominous. Tell me more.
It's an old stone wall along the cemetery's edge, crumbling with age. People claim to hear voices coming from the wall, as if the spirits inside are trying to reach out. Some even say they've heard their own names whispered.
Oh, that sent shivers down my spine. You know, I'm fascinated by this idea that spirits might try to communicate. Why do you think whispers are so common in ghost stories?
Well, whispers are elusive, difficult to pinpoint, and easily misinterpreted. So they're ideal for fueling our imaginations, especially in a place like that cemetery where the veil between the worlds feels thin. It's not surprising that people would hear anything as whispers.
So our minds are like primed to hear the voices of the dead. Okay, the cemetery is officially off my list of places to visit, even in broad daylight. But this town has so many other unsettling tales.
Yeah.
And the podcast touched on some interesting local folklore. What are some of the stories that stood out to you?
There's one about a spectral hound said to roam the outskirts of town, always appearing before a tragedy.
A ghost dog. That's terrifying and kind of sad.
Locals see it as a harbinger of death, like a manifestation of Cain's evil.
You know, it's interesting, this spectral hound motif. It appears in folklore all over the world. Why do you think dogs are often associated with death and the supernatural?
Well, throughout history, dogs have been seen as guardians and protectors, even guides in the spiritual realm. So it's not surprising they'd be associated with death as well.
They're almost like psychopomps, leading the way to the other side.
Exactly. And the spectral hound could be seen as a manifestation of that belief.
It's a chilling reminder that sometimes the things that guard us in life can also be the ones that lead us to our deaths. What other folklore did you find?
There's the tale of the vanishing hitchhiker, a young woman in white who appears on lonely roads asking for rides.
Oh yeah, I've heard this one. She disappears without a trace, leaving behind a faint lavender scent.
It's a classic ghost story, a reminder that death can come at any time.
I love the detail about the lavender scent. It grounds the supernatural in the real world.
Sensory details like that are so effective, they make it feel more real, more disturbing.
Speaking of disturbing, The podcast mentioned a particularly chilling legend called Cain's Touch.
Oh yes, Cain's touch. It's the belief that Cain's spirit can interact with the physical world, leaving marks or scratches or symbols.
It's not as overt as poltergeist activity,
Yeah.
but it creates this constant unease, like he's always watching.
It's like he's reminding them of his power even in death. Do you think there's any psychological basis for this need to leave a mark, to exert control?
It's possible it stems from our human need for agency, for control, in the face of death, which is the ultimate loss of control. The idea that a spirit can still interact with the world can be terrifying, but also strangely comforting.
It suggests that even in death, there's a possibility of leaving a mark.
Of not being forgotten.
Exactly.
A way of denying the finality of death, clinging to power, even in the face of oblivion.
And it makes sense that this belief would be so strong in a town like this, where his presence is so deeply ingrained.
The town's isolation, surrounded by those dense, dark woods, only amplifies that sense of vulnerability. It's like they're trapped.
In a cage of their own making?
Yeah, and the Lost Souls Bridge legend definitely plays into that.
Right, this old wooden bridge crossing a deep ravine. It's believed to be a gateway to the spirit world, a place where the souls of Cain's victims are trapped.
So they're caught between worlds, forever tethered to the site of their trauma.
The podcast mentioned a ritual where you can hear their cries by standing on the bridge at midnight and calling out Cain's name.
That's terrifying.
It speaks to our fascination with communicating with the dead, hoping to find answers or offer comfort.
But the reality is often more unsettling. It's like opening a door you might not be able to close. So we have a haunted cemetery, a spectral hound, a vanishing hitchhiker, a bridge to the spirit world.
It's amazing anyone lives there at all.
I know, right?
But I think that speaks to the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the face of fear and uncertainty, people find ways to adapt, to cope, to create meaning.
It's like they're saying, we may be living in a haunted town, but we're not giving up.
Exactly, and it's important to remember that not everyone buys into these stories. There are those who are skeptical.
Right. The podcast mentioned a local historian, Edward Carter, who dedicated his life to researching Samuel Cain and the town's paranormal activity. He was trying to separate fact from fiction.
To find a rational explanation.
What do you think motivates someone to do that? Is it courage, curiosity, or a little of both?
I think it's a combination of things. There's definitely courage, but also a deep curiosity, a desire to understand.
Edward Carter seems like he was walking that fine line between belief and disbelief. He wanted answers, but he also had to be open to the possibility that those answers might be supernatural.
Exactly, and that's what makes his story so compelling. He was a man of science, yet he was drawn to these mysteries.
So what did he discover? Did his research shed any light on the haunting?
Well, his research led him down a dark path. He uncovered evidence that Cain had dabbled in the occult.
The occult. Okay, what did he find?
He theorized that Cain's curse wasn't just words, but a deliberate act, a ritualistic binding of his spirit to the town.
So he was intentionally haunting the town.
He began to suspect that Cain wasn't alone, that there were others, living individuals carrying on his legacy.
Wait, are you saying there might be a cult or a secret society operating in the town?
That was his theory. He believed they were drawn to Cain's power.
So it's not just a ghost story. It's a conspiracy. Did he ever identify any of these individuals?
That's a mystery. Edward vanished one night, leaving behind his research, and a town even more afraid.
So not only is the town haunted by a potential occult serial killer, but it might also be harboring a secret society. What happened to him? Do you think his research was dangerous?
It's possible he uncovered something that those who seek to keep Cain's darkness alive didn't want revealed.
This is like a real-life horror movie. We have a haunted town, a vengeful spirit, and now a possible conspiracy. It's like every layer we peel back is more disturbing.
And as we go deeper, the lines between the supernatural and human darkness become more and more blurred.
It makes you wonder if the real horror isn't the ghosts themselves, but the darkness within us all.
That's a question we'll have to consider as we continue.
This is just getting more intriguing. I can't wait to see where this deep dive takes us next.
Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll explore the efforts of those fighting back, those seeking to break the curse and reclaim their town.
All right, so we're back, wrapping up our deep dive into the town haunted by Samuel Cain. It's been a wild ride.
It has.
From spooky footsteps to spectral hounds to a possible conspiracy involving dark forces and those who want to control them. But amidst all this fear and uncertainty, I'm really curious about those who are fighting back. those trying to reclaim their town from this darkness. The podcast hosts mentioned a group called the Guardians.
Yes, the Guardians.
What can you tell us about them?
They're a small group, and they're very secretive, but they believe they understand the true nature of the haunting. They don't think it's just Kane's ghost. They believe it's something more
Like what?
malevolent entities, perhaps drawn by the energy of Kane's crimes, feeding on the town's fear.
So it's like a supernatural ecosystem. That's both terrifying and fascinating. But what can they do against such powerful forces?
They believe knowledge is power. They see themselves as protectors, using their understanding of the paranormal to banish these entities.
That sounds like a pretty daunting task. Do we know anything about their methods?
Their methods are secret, but there are whispers of ancient rituals, protective wards, even a deep knowledge of the occult.
Maybe from Edward Carter's research?
It's possible.
Okay, so it's like they're waging a secret war against the supernatural.
Yeah.
A battle most people aren't even aware of. Do you think they're making any progress?
There are rumors, strange lights in the woods, symbols appearing and disappearing, even a decrease in paranormal activity in some areas.
But no concrete evidence.
They're careful not to attract attention.
It's like a secret society,
Yeah.
protecting the town from the things that go bump in the night. But are they really helping, or just delaying the inevitable?
That's the big question. Can this town ever truly be free?
Or will it always be haunted by Kane? This is heavy thought. But what strikes me most about this whole story is the resilience of the townspeople. They haven't given up.
I agree. Their determination to understand and even combat the supernatural is remarkable. They're not letting fear paralyze them.
It's inspiring. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure.
We find ways to adapt, to find meaning, and to forge a path forward.
Their story is a testament to hope. So where does that leave us? We've explored the legends, the hauntings, the darkness. What's the takeaway for our listeners?
I think this deep dive has challenged us to think about fear, the power of belief, the interplay of history, psychology, and the unknown. It reminds us that every town has its own stories, its own shadows.
It's a reminder to stay curious, to question everything, and to never underestimate the human spirit. But we've only just scratched the surface. What happened to Edward Carter? Who are the Guardians? Will this town ever find peace?
Those are questions for you to ponder. Perhaps the answers lie in the town itself.
If you're interested in this case, check out the Pod WeCast episode. They did an incredible job.
And remember, the next time you hear a whisper in the dark, ask yourself, is it just the wind or something more?
Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical. And as always, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.